Today is Sunday, Yom Rishon B'Shabbos, the third day of the month of Kislev, and we are continuing with the end of the Mishnah on Daf Samach Daled, going on to Samach Daled, going on to Samach Daled Amud Beis. We left off at the bottom of Samach Daled Amud with the last three words on the line, if I'm not mistaken. I lie. Yeah, that's what we are. The last three words of the line, the Amud. The Mishnah says as follows: Rabbi Eliezer teaches us Yud Daled, the 14th day of the month of Nisan, going on to Samach Daled Beis, Shechalios v'Shabbos, that happened to fall out on a Shabbos. Maniach. So we had discussed that if you didn't have enough hooks in the Azar of the Beis Hamikdash, so you would hang up your korban on a rope, on a pole that was suspended between two people's shoulders. Says the Mishnah from Rabbi Eliezer that if it fell out on Shabbos and there weren't enough hooks, what did you do? You put your hand on your friend's shoulder, and your friend put his hand on your shoulder, and then you would suspend the korban pesach from your two hands, via your two arms, umashit. And then you would skin the animal without any poles. Why should you not have poles? Because that would be taken mana, meaning that you would be making a kli, you'd be making a tool through suspending a hook on a pole. So that you were not allowed to do. Once you had suspended it, meaning in all cases, you tore open the animal. Rashi there says along the lines of the giddon of the sinews. And you took out all of the fat. You put them on a tray. And then you burnt it all on the mizbech, meaning all of the innards of the animal that were not going to be eaten, those all need to be put on the mizbech. Says the Mishnah. Yotza Kasu Shaina. Once the first group left, V'yashva la b'harabais. On Shabbos, what happened? Yatsa Kasu Shana, the first group left, V'yashva lo b'harabais, and sat on harabais. Shnia, the second group, Bachel, they sat in the area of the Mikdash called the Chel Shlishis b'mkoima oimeres. And the third group, those that came last to offer the korban pesach on Shabbos afternoon, they would stay where they were. Why? Because while you were allowed to take your sheep up to Harabais, because the sheep can walk by itself, you cannot carry it down from Harabais because that would be Hatzah on Shabbos, and you are not allowed to carry the sheep that you have just sacrificed. And now you have to go home and cook. That would be an Isdaraisa of Hatzah. So you'd stay on Harabais, or the second group would stay in the Chel, and the third group would stay exactly where they were in the Azar. Chashecha, the moment that it got dark, Yotzu, they went out, V'tzalo es bischehem, and they roasted the korban pesach. Meaning Lela Seder meant that everybody had to come home, and first and foremost on a Matzah Shabbos you had to roast your korban pesach. There was a table should have been set from before Pesach, from before Shabbos, so that there would be no achana, and then everybody had to wait. You didn't get started with kiddush right away. You had to start roasting your korban pesach. That was the number one thing to do as soon as Shabbos ended. Says the Gemara as follows. The Gemara is 8 lines down from the top of the page on Samach Daled Amud Beis. Says the Gemara as follows. Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak teaches us Ein HaPesach Nishchat Ela Begimel Kita Shel Shloshim Bnei Adam. Rabbi Yitzchak says that the korban pesach had to be shechted with three groups of at least 30 people, meaning minimum 90 people, three groups of 30. Every group has to have at least 30, and you have to have three groups. Why? My timer, what is the reason? Because the pasuk tells us, like the Mishnah had said, kahal ve'eda v'yisrael, that you have to shech the korban pesach, kol kahal adas Yisrael. You need kahal, you need eda, you need Yisrael. And now we have a question, says Rabbi Yitzchak. Misav kalan I bebas achas I bazar chazeh. Do we need kahal, adas, and Yisrael in one group or in every group? Hilkach. Therefore, what do we need? Ba'inan shalosh kita shel shloshim bnei adam. You need to have a kahal and an eda and Yisrael present at each of these, and you need to have it 3 times over, which means shloshim bnei adam. Di'iba basachas, because if you would put them all together, ika, they are kahal das Yisrael. And if the way to read the pasuk is that you need to have one after the other, a kas of kahal and a kas of a group of kahal, a group of adas and a group of Yisrael, so that you'd have it there as well, meaning 3 groups of at least 3 minyanim. Ha'ika, and that you would have. Hilkach, therefore, he says bechamishin nami sagi. You could also do it with a minimum of 50 people. You need 50 people at least to bring the Korban Pesach. Da'ali tlasin va'avdi, because 30 people enter and bring the Korbanos. Da'ali tlasin va'avdi, 30 people could enter. Va'ali asara, then 10 people would come in. V'nafki asara, and 10 people would go out that already brought their Korban. Ali asara, and then another 10 people go in, and another 10 people go out. Meaning, not everybody has to bring the Korban Pesach at the same time, but you need at least 50 people in order to ensure that there are 30 people present when anybody is offering the Korban Pesach. And then there's the Shaila, whether this is din daraisa, din darabanan, is this remes, is this ma'akev? There's a lot to work out here. Meaning, the chavra that sneak up to Arabais to offer the Korban Pesach, they're missing kala. That's the yishol. Do you need that? Is that part and parcel of the avoda of being makar of the Korban Pesach, or is that something additional? Nevertheless, says the Gemara as follows: Nichnas hakas Shana. The first group entered. So Itmar Abaye Amar Abaye says Nin Alutnan, that the way to read the Mishnah is Nin Alu. The doors were locked. What does it mean? The doors were locked. Me elehem says Rashi u'maser nisim, that it was miraculous. That once enough people had entered, the doors locked. Rava Amar Rava says No alim tanan. We don't say Nin Alu, but No alin, that they locked the doors, meaning the people in charge of the Beis Hamikdash, they would have clickers and they would count enough people, and they would have fire codes, and they knew how many people could fit and how many people were not supposed to, and then they would close the door. So my beinayo, what's the machlokes Abaye v'Rava? Iga beinayo, the nafkamina is lemismach anisa. Are we allowed to rely on a miracle here? Meaning, was the assumption that people would just walk in and then miraculously the doors would close, or no? People had to stand there with clickers and count. Abaye Amar Abaye says Nin alutanan, that the doors were locked by themselves. As soon as people had entered, malu, they entered, meaning as many people entered, but samchina anisa, and they relied on a miracle to ensure that once enough people had entered, they closed the door. Now, it's important to point out that it wasn't that they were making sure that they had clickers to max it out. Rather, you had to make sure that there were at least 30 people. So because the space in the Beis Hamikdash expanded as much as was necessary. So you didn't have fire codes telling you who could or couldn't come in. But it seems to be pashas that they would close once enough people had entered. Rashi says here, "Samchina anisa v'chol zman she'ein nin alin melehem v'nichan aisam likanis v'lo yachashin dima ailu kulu." And the max out was by making sure that not everybody had entered, that you would still be able to have 3 groups, so that you would still be able to have 3 groups, so that the minimum, it depended on how many Jews there were that were coming to offer. You had to make sure that there were at least 3 groups of 30. So if you had 10,000 people that showed up for the first round, they could come in, no problem, as long as there were still 60 people waiting outside. Says the Gemara as follows. That was Samchina Anisa. Rava says, No alim tanan, we would lock the doors, meaning people. People would lock the doors. We don't rely on miracles. Now we have a problem. Now we have a Mishnah in Edius that says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Chas v'sholem sha'akavi min ma'alel nisnada. There was a debate about Akavi min Halalel, who had said something disparaging about Shemaya Naftali. And there's a shaila whether or not he was put in cherem. Says the Mishnah in Edios, Shakavi min Halalel nisnada chas v'sholem, says Rabbi Yehuda, that they put him in cherem. She'ein azarin in elas al kol adam yisrael b'chachma u'v'yiras chet ka'akavi min Halalel, because the Beis Hamikdash would never shut. How could you put him in cherem? The Beis Hamikdash itself would never shut. If there was a Jew like Akavi min Halalel that was waiting to get inside. The question is as follows. Well, how do you read that? What do you mean the Beis Hamikdash would never shut? Abaye explains according to him. And Rava explains this according to him. Abaye explains this Mishnah Edios Ein ba'azar b'shas shenin Allah al kol adam Yisrael b'chacham v'yiraschei ka'akavim ha'halal. The doors of the Beis Hamikdash would never have shut. Meaning, miraculously, they could never shut if Ka'akavim ha'halal was standing outside. A Jew of that stature, of that greatness, the doors of the Beis Hamikdash would have stayed open to allow him in. That was never a problem. Rava explains according to his rationale. Ein ba'azara that the people in charge of the Beis Hamikdash would never have closed the door. They would never shut the door in the face of somebody as great as Kavim Halal. Meaning, what the Mishnah had said was in the passive voice. It was they were not shut. By whom? By Nisim or by people? Either which way, both Abai and Rava can read that Mishnah according to their shittas. Tan Rabban, the Rabban taught in the Brisa as follows. Ma'olam lo nismaich adam ba'azara, that nobody, despite the massive throngs of people, nobody was ever crushed in the Azara, chutz mi Pesach echad, shehaya b'mei Hillel, except for one Pesach that happened in the time of Hillel. Shenismach by zaken echad, where one old man was crushed by all the people coming to the Mikdash. By Kohen Osa Pesach meuchin, and that was so traumatic. There was it was so heavy. That furthermore, that Pesach was called the Pesach of the Pesach that was crushed, Pesach Mochin. Rashi says Al Shem Shen Nismaich, because somebody was crushed. That trauma stuck with him. The Rabbanan taught as follows: once it happened that Agrippus, the king, wanted to take a census of the Jewish people. He said to the Kohen Gadol of the time, look at the current Pesach. Because that's when we're going to see a lot of Jews are coming to the Beis Hamikdash. You want to know how many people are there. Not all kulia mikol echad. The Kohen Gadol took one kidney from each korban. V'nimtzu sham shishim riboy zugi kloyas. And by the time they counted them all up, there were 600,000 pairs of kloyas, meaning, and it weren't pairs from one pair from each animal, but one kidney from each animal, which means, says the Gemara, that this was kiflaim ki yetz Mitzrayim, more than double the amount of people that left Egypt. You're talking about 1.2 million kidneys were counted by the Kohen Gadol. Chutz mi tamei she'hay b'derech rechoka, and that excludes anybody that was tamei or anybody that was far away. Ve'ein lecha kol pesach pesach shelo nimnu alav yes me'asar b'nei adam, and every korban Pesach had at least 10 people on it. So you're talking 1.2 million korban Pesachs, and each one of them had at least 10 people on them, and that doesn't even take into account all of the people that were Tameh and B'derech Rechoka. That's a lot of people. V'hayu karin osei, and they called that Pesach Me'uvim, the thick Pesach, the heavy Pesach. Rashi says, Av al Shem Sham Rav. There was so many people. It was filled. Jerusalem was filled with everybody. Miraculously. Yeah, you have to assume. Now the Gemara challenges this whole story here. Not al kulia. What do you mean he took a kidney? How do you take a kidney? It's a korban. Yeah, but it needs to be burnt on the mizbech. Says the Gemara, no, because he put it on the mizbech afterwards. No problem. V'aksiv, doesn't the pasuk say? V'iktiroi, you have to burn it, meaning you have to burn the korban. Shelo ya'ariv chelbav shel zeh bazeh, that you shouldn't mix up the fats of one animal with another animal. Meaning each animal gets burnt on the mizbech one by one. You can't collect the kidneys and put them on afterwards. So the hadar maktilahu chad. Yeah, he says no. Each one of them was burnt one at a time. Va'atanya, doesn't the Brisa teach us? V'hikdiram, and he will burn them. Sheyehei kula ke'achad, he has to burn the whole animal, all of the pieces of each animal as one. So he says, Ela tfisa ba'alma. What did he do? He grabbed it. Meaning, as they were checked the korban, they brought up they brought up the innards of the animal, and then before they put it on, he picked up a kidney and he tallied one, and then he put it on together with everything else. Then he tallied another one too. Says the shakel minai who ad the avin lay mida achrina. He held it until they brought him another one, meaning one by one. But it was all burnt together. But the thing that he was counting was kidneys, because that made it easier for him to count. That was an easy enough part to be able to hold one by one to be able to count. Now, challenging or examining what was going on in the Beis Hamikdash, Says the Mishnah as follows: Kahanim, I'm sure is that the Kahanim was standing row by row with gold in one row and silver in another row. My time, what's the reason for this? If we say maybe the concern is that they would give a basin of gold and return a basin of silver, meaning which would be an issue of not being malim kodesh ve'imoridin, that we don't want to go up, we want to go up in kedusha, but don't want to go down. It says hachanami. So yeah, even if it's separated row by row, dilma shakli bar masan mal bar mea. Maybe you would take one that was worth a lot of money, and give back one that was worth less money. Meaning, okay, so the gold is different sizes, different weights. That would also be a problem in Malim Kodesh. So he says, no, Ella, it wasn't a question of Malim Kodesh. It was Ella, the Hachi Shapitve, is more beautiful if you do it this way. Yeah, meaning you have them in separate rows, that looks more beautiful to have it. It's more aesthetically pleasing. If all the gold is in one row, all the silver is in another row, that makes it more beautiful. So and the pans that they collected in, the cups that they collected in, never had any bases. They didn't have a bottom. Came to a point so that you couldn't put it down without anything spilling, so they didn't put it down. Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa says as follows: all of the basins, all of the cups that were in the base of Mikdash did not have a base. Aside from the cups of Levana is frankincense. That they would put on top of the lechem apanim. The lechem apanim was the showbreads that went on the shulchan. They were very delicate and they had a very specific shape. And if you put something with a point on it, so maybe it would split the bread. Shema yanichum v'yifres halechem, because if you would put something sharp on it, maybe that would crack the bread. And you didn't want that. You wanted each lechem to still be whole. So that had a base. That was the only thing that you were allowed to put down. Says the Gemara, quoting from the Mishnah, Shachet Yisrael v'kibul hakain. That a Yisrael would shecht and a kohen would receive the blood. So we mentioned this yesterday. Loisagi delav Yisrael. That is it mean that Loisagi delav Yisrael is not enough that he is not a Yisrael. So we say he gufa kamash malan. This is exactly what we're coming to teach you. Meaning, it's not that it's not okay if it's not a Yisrael. It's not that you have to have a Yisrael. This is what the Mishnah is telling us. That you're allowed to have a Yisrael, even a Yisrael, meaning a non-Kain, or a Levi, is allowed to shecht the karban. You don't have to have a Kain doing the shechita. The shechita is kosher bazar. The kibul Kain, the Kain has to accept. This comes to teach us mikabala ve'elach, that from Kabbalah and Elach, Kabbalah, Halacha, and Zrika, you need those steps. You have to have a Kain. Mikabbalah ve'elach mitzvahs kuna. That's where you have to have a Kain. You cannot have a Yisrael or a Levi doing so. So you give the blood to the friend, and the friend of the friend of the friend of the friend. They pass it along the line. Shmat mina. What do you hear from this? That after Kabbalah happens, the next thing that happens is Halacha. Halacha means walking it over. That's what it means. Lalechet. Halacha. Says the Gemara, it seems to imply from the Mishnah, halacha shaloi baregel have a halacha. Taking it over without walking is also called halacha. Just standing there and passing it, that's called halacha. Amazing. Says the Gemara, no, that's not a clear inference. Dilmahu and Nayapurta. Maybe you took 2 steps, meaning you did walk. I mean, there's no clear indication from the Mishnah that nobody did any walking. Of course, there was some walking involved. Or maybe there wasn't, but from this Mishnah, you don't see that there necessarily wasn't. It could have been that he collected here and then he moved over. No, beseda. It says, so what are we coming to learn from all of this? Hakamash Milan, we learn from this, Baravam Hadras Melech, that with more people, there's more glory for the king. That's why you have a row of Kohanim here, because one Kohen carrying from one side to another side, that's schleppy. But if you have hundreds of Kohanim all lined up in rows, okay, even if they take a shuffle this way and a shuffle that way, it's more Baravam Hadras Melech. You want to have thousands of Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, all doing the Avodah together, Gvaldik. Kibble es hamale umachzer es harekan, says the Mishnah, you would accept the full one and put back the empty one, meaning you would pass a full one and you would take back an empty one. It says ha'ibchaloi, but the opposite not, meaning it wasn't that they would pass you an empty one and then you would give the full one. Why? Messiah Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, that supports the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, because Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish teaches us ein ma'avir and ala mitzvahs. You are not allowed to be ma'avir ala mitzvahs. The mitzvah is to get the blood to the Yesod HaMizbech. That's we'll learn about Yesod in a moment. You have to get the blood there. Don't do anything before that. Meaning, passing an empty cup to you before you pass the full cup, that would be ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. The mitzvah is to do the thing that you need to do now. So the first thing to do is pass the full cup. So only once you pass the full cup, you would receive back an empty cup. Says the Mishnah, the kohen that was closest to Mizbech. So man tana Pesach bizrika. Says the Gemara, who taught us that the blood of the Pesach has to be thrown on the Mizbech? Why couldn't it just be poured? Says Amar Rabbi Chisda, Amar Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Chisda says, this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili. The Tanya we have a Bryce, Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili teaches us says Dam Tizrak Ala Mizbeach, that the blood the blood of their blood, Damam Tizrak Ala Mizbeach, you have to throw on the Mizbeach. Ves Chelbam Taktir, and their chelev, their fats, you have to offer. Damoy Loinema. It doesn't say its blood. Ela Damam, their blood. Chelboy Loinema. It doesn't say its fat. Ela Chelbam, their fats. Limeid al Bechar Umaisa Pesach. And this teaches us about these three exceptions to Karbanos, which is Bechar, Maisa, and Pesach. That's what the Rambam writes. There are four primary sections of Karbanos, which is Chatas, Asham, Ola, and Shlamim. And then there's three exceptions, which is Bechar, Maisa, and Pesach. Shehein Tu'unin Matan Damim Ve'imurim Legab Mizbech. These three require Matan Damim. They need the blood to be put on the Mizbech, Ve'imurim Legab Mizbech, and they need their bloods and fats to be put on the Mizbech. And it says it in plural by all three of them. And these are the only korbanos that are not mentioned this din anywhere else. And therefore the plural is used to teach you that it applies to all three of them. That's the pasuk about Midbar. Minala and the Tu'unim Yusaid. How do you know that all three of them need to be thrown? That actually it needs zrika, and not just that it needs to be poured. Minala and the Tu'unim Yusaid. How do you know that it needs the Yusaid Mizbech? That it needs to be thrown onto the wall of the Mizbech and then drip down onto the Yusaid. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Elazar, as is zrika. We learn Shava of zrika to zrika. Throwing to throwing, sprinkling of sprinkling. Okay. And Me'ola, from the din of Ola, Ksiv Hacha, the pasuk says, yeah, Estamam Tizraik, you should sprinkle their blood onto the Mizbech, not pour it, you have to sprinkle it. Ksiv Hasam, the pasuk says, Dev Zark b'nei Aaron HaKohanim is Damai ala Mizbech Saviv. That there by the Ola, by the Ola Stamid, that Aaron and his sons are going to sprinkle, they're going to throw the blood onto the Mizbech. Ma'ola to an Yisod, just like an Ola requires Yisod. Of Pesach Nami to an Yisod, so too the Korban Pesach also needs Yisod. Going on to Samachay and Aleph, says the Gemara asking the question about Ola Guf Minala. How do you know that the Korban Ola needs Yisod Bichlal? Where does it say that? Amakra, the pasuk says El Yisod Mizbach Ha'ila, to the base of the Mizbech of the Ola. Alma comes from implies this clearly implies Ola to a Yisod, that the Ola needs a Yisod. And Be'ezhem Mizbarach, we will continue with Yatzak HaShoshana Be'ezhem Mizbarach tomorrow morning. Looking forward to seeing everybody there. We'll see you later. Have a beautiful